All right. Thank you for watching this next part of second grade Bible. Last time we talked about how David was on the run from Saul. He, Saul had taken 3,000 men to try to catch David. But Saul was king and he had responsibilities. And he had to face the fact that the Philistines were threatening and he was going to have to do battle with them. So he assembled his army and faced the Philistines, and so the Philistines were lined up on one side, the Israelites on the other, and it was getting evening. The battle was probably going to take place the next day, and Saul was afraid. And he said to some of his men, "Get me a medium." Now, a medium was a person who consulted the dead. And this was not allowed really in that religion and that area. And Saul himself had been an enemy of the mediums and chased them out of the country. But now he wanted to consult the dead, and the reason he did was he was missing Samuel. Samuel had recently died. Samuel was his mentor. Samuel was the person who had given him stability in his life. And even though Samuel was the one who rebuked him and let him know that God was not pleased with him, he needed Samuel. And Samuel was nowhere around. So his men said, "We have found a medium for you." And he went there and he said, "Get me the man that I asked for." And the woman said, You got to be kidding. The king has forbidden this." And Saul said, "I will guarantee your safety." So the woman went through her incantations, whatever it was that she did, and she really, from the way the story is written, did not seem to expect a real person to come from the dead. But there, coming out of the ground, was Samuel. And when she saw him, she fainted. She screamed. She couldn't believe it. And Samuel spoke to Saul. Saul didn't do much speaking. Mostly it was just Samuel. And he said to Saul, first of all, "You have disturbed my rest. And second of all, you're going to join me tomorrow." Pretty clear language. You're going to die. That was the message that Saul got from Samuel. The next day, Saul, his sons, and the army all went after the Philistines. And it was a fierce battle and pretty much lost by the Israelites. And Saul and his sons died in that battle. And David received news from the battle that Saul had died and that his good friend Jonathan had died. And it grieved him very much. And there is a passage in the scripture that gives us David's lament for these two men. Even though Saul had hated David, David lamented his death. And the passage begins, how the mighty have fallen. So now David, in a sense, had an open access to the kingdom. As it worked out, because there was some opposition, uh, immediately he became king of the southern portion of the country, which was called Judah, after the largest, most powerful tribe in that area. And for 7 years, David was king of Judah. And then for the next 33 years, he was king of all Israel. And during that time, David was a very successful king. One of the first things he did was to capture the city of Jerusalem, which had been held by foreigners, the enemies of Israel, which were called Jebusites. And David captured that city and made it the capital. And it was to remain the capital for many, many years. He also developed a well-organized bureaucracy. He organized the priesthood and the worship in the temple, or in the, it wasn't a temple, but in the tabernacle. And he conquered all the countries and tribes and so forth that surrounded Israel, so that eventually the nation controlled a strip of land from the Mediterranean eastward, some distance east of the Jordan River and the Dead Sea, and then south to a dry creek bed. Occasionally would have water in it, which was called the Wadi of Egypt, which had long been sort of the southern border. And that strip of land went all the way north up into the area that's now Syria, to the Euphrates River. So that was a very sizable kingdom, or it could be called an empire. And in fact, one could say that that was the dominant empire of the Middle East for at least a short period of time. And that's how successful David was. So one day, David was in his palace. He had a palace now. He was big, he was rich, he was successful. And Nathan was his friend, his consultant. He was a prophet. And Nathan was in the throne room, and David said to Nathan, you know, I've got a house. I have really a nice house. But you know, the Lord, figuratively speaking, lives in a tent. And he's referring to the fact that the Ark of the Covenant was still in a tent, much as it had been in the tabernacle in the wilderness. And the priests operated out of that tent. And David felt it was kind of inappropriate. And he said to Nathan, I think I should build the Lord a house, a temple, so to speak. Well, Nathan said, do what's in your heart. But that night, Nathan was praying, and the Lord spoke to him and had a message for David. And so the next day, Nathan came back and spoke to David. And he said something on this order, and it was actually almost sarcastic, the words, and these were the words of the Lord. He says to David, okay, you're going to build me a house. All these years, hundreds of years, I've been in a tent. Have I ever asked for a house? I don't think so. And you are going to build me a house? You're actually a man of war, and you are not going to build me a house. Your son will build me a house, but not you. But I am going to build you a house. And what he meant by that is that the Lord was going to establish his dynasty. David would be the head of a dynasty that would last. And the Lord said, it will last forever. There will never be a time when there won't be a man on your throne. And this promise, which is generally called a covenant with David, was a very key factor in understanding David, understanding really the Old Testament and the nation of Israel, and even into the New Testament. Now, that promise doesn't seem to be fulfilled. And many people might scratch their head and say, well, now, wait a minute. But there is a sense in which it is fulfilled and will be fulfilled. Very important promise to David. That ends this part of Kindergarten Bible, Part 2B, the second part of that. Thank you for watching.